Hi Joggies, welcome to another episode of Study with Mr. K. Today we'll be doing Tectonics Topic 3. Okay, Tectonics Topic 3, it can be a bit overwhelming sometimes, but nevertheless, let's just go through this. Basically, at the end of the day, it is about sustainable development through disaster risk management. Okay, so this is what this whole topic is all about, right? And in the first 3.1, it talks about what is a disaster risk. What is a disaster risk? Okay. And in 3.1, we talk about disaster risk management as well. Disaster risk management. Okay, disaster risk management. Okay. And what exactly is disaster risk management? It can be done in two few ways. Okay, there is before disaster, during disaster, and also after a disaster. These are ways that how we can, before, what we do is we try to prevent by having strategies such as predicting or designing hazard resistant buildings or predicting when the disaster may strike. During is to reduce the amount of damages. Okay, reduce the amount of damages. And last but not least, when it is after, we try to manage. Okay, so these are the few things we try to manage disaster after it occurs, and that includes insurance, that includes quick recovery. So that is disaster risk management. Okay, and why do we do that? Why? It is because there are consequences to disaster, tectonic disaster risk. There are environment consequences. There are social consequences, and there are economic consequences, okay, to these disaster risks. Like for example, landslides may cause ecosystems to be swept away. Debris from landslides may pollute rivers. Okay, social consequences are such as the injuries and loss of life. People may become homeless. Seawater may contaminate wells, and individual may also suffer from psychological trauma. And last but not least, for economic consequences, we are talking about destruction of homes and properties. Financially, individuals will need to repair or rebuild. Business owners will lose their incomes, and government will need to spend money to do so, right? So that is that. So these consequences, okay, they actually hinder the development of a certain country, and so it actually means that countries have to channel money to rebuild instead of investing this money, and this is very, very bad or detrimental to developing countries who are facing this form of disaster. And because poverty reduction progress may be affected, and countries' economic growth may also be slowed down. Okay, but it is interesting how developed countries manage them as well. So you will see very kind of strategies and very kind of impact. Okay, like for example, Japan, right? Japan lives basically beside a huge plate boundary, and volcanoes, tectonic hazards, okay, happens near Japan. How can they manage? How did they manage better than others? Alright, and more importantly, okay, these consequences, okay, when it is important to reduce disaster risk, Why is that so? Because these consequences can be reduced because firstly, consequences can be reduced or managed. Okay, and it is important because developing countries are often disproportionately affected by tectonic hazards because they often lack the capacity, right? So there are developing countries which do manage to reduce. However, it needs a lot of time and effort. There needs to be cost-effective strategies for them. Okay, so for developing countries, they need cost-effective methods to manage, right? And they are usually at the losing end when it comes to disaster risk management. Alright, so next, that is for 3.1. 3.1 gives an overview, an oversight of the disaster risk management, or the explanation of disaster risk management. Secondly, we talk about the variation. Okay, you will realize that in all clusters we talk about variations across places, right? And there are variations across places, across different types of places as well. So what are the factors that affect the extent of tectonic risk? Of tectonic risk. Okay, so that is let's look at 3.2. For 3.2, we talk about the extent, the measurement, right? Variations. Okay, we touch on firstly the factors affecting disaster risk. This is similar to climate, right? We talk about nature of hazard, we talk about their vulnerable conditions, and last but not least, we talk about exposure. And I mentioned before, these are just multiplier effects. Okay, we're going to look at them in terms of earthquakes, in terms of volcanic eruptions. Alright, so we will look at these factors in terms of that. Okay, so for earthquakes, okay, let us now go on to earthquakes. So for earthquakes, what are some variations? What will cause variation in the impact of earthquakes? Like, for example, on the nature hazards, the nature of hazard. Okay, first of all, it is caused by the duration of shaking. The length of ground shaking can influence the extent of disaster risk. So the longer the duration of ground shaking, the more damaging the earthquake will be. Okay, next we talk about the time of shaking. The time, if it's at night, okay, there will be less alert and therefore people are unable to evacuate quickly. On the other hand, when people are at work, they are more alert. They'll be able to evacuate quickly. Okay, so the time and duration, they do matter. Alright, and then we look at the vulnerable conditions. Okay, what are the vulnerable conditions that can affect disaster risk, the amount of disaster risk? We look at firstly the quality of building design and construction. So if a place is not rightfully constructed and built, okay, it plays a very huge role in determining the extent of disaster risk. In general, earthquakes do not really kill people. Actually, buildings kill people. Buildings that are weak, that will collapse, kill people. So the poorer the quality of building design, the more vulnerable the buildings are to collapsing, and this will lead to more trapped people, injured people, and they are actually usually poorly built. Okay, so a lot of times the quality of building actually actually increase the vulnerable conditions. Next, we talk about the soil and rock properties. Okay, the soil and rock properties, why do we look at this? Because it can potentially open up to an impact called soil liquefaction, which I have talked about in topic 2. Okay, for soil liquefaction, buildings become so vulnerable to collapse because they sink into the liquefied soil and they are trapped in the collapsed building. So the softer the soil, the higher the risk over here. Okay, the softer the soil, the worse the damage would be, because loose soil, soft and loose soil, they will actually increase the amount of intensity. Okay, it will be amplified, okay, as compared to hard rocks. Okay, as compared to hard rocks, and people will more likely be trapped, right? And next we talk about exposure. Okay, exposure. What is exposure? Okay, exposure, we are talking about population density. Okay, the population density of a place obviously will influence the impact or the risk that's being caused by the earthquake. Okay, if there's a higher population, obviously more people will be affected. Okay, that's for population density. Next, we're talking about distance from epicenter. Alright, distance from epicenter, the closer you are, the greater number, the nearer the city is to the epicenter, or to the nearer a place is to the epicenter, more people will be affected because the magnitude will increase tremendously. Alright, so this is for earthquake, these are the so-called the disaster risk. Okay, we have divided them as how the guidebook has done so. So do use these terms. Do use these factors influencing disaster risk. These are factors, okay, influencing disaster risk. Alright, do note these concepts. Okay, do note these concepts. Okay, nature of hazards, vulnerable conditions, and also exposure. And these are similar to your climate as well, right? Climate cluster. Right, let's move on. Okay, so next we're going to look into volcanic eruptions. Likewise, I'm going to be explaining the different factors. Okay, for volcanic eruptions, the nature of eruptions, okay, or the nature of the hazard is due to the viscosity of magma, because as mentioned in last topic, the thicker, the higher the viscosity, the more explosive the eruption would be, right? And that will be damaging, the damage will be more. Okay, so that is on the viscosity of magma. Next, we talk about vulnerable conditions. Okay, vulnerable conditions, we are talking about such as the availability of surface and groundwater. Why are we talking about these two? Okay, there is a reason, because the more surface and groundwater there is, okay, the higher the likelihood of lahars. Okay, lahars needs water, right? So if there is large amount of water, okay, lahars will be formed, and lahars are destructive, and they are very destructive. Okay, next we're talking about prevailing wind condition. When there is a huge amount of what is prevailing wind condition is the strength of and direction of wind will actually aid and affect the distribution of ashfall and tephra. Okay, and these will influence the extent of disaster risk. Okay, ashfall and tephra can be carried to human settlement. So if there is no prevailing wind that blow towards human settlement, then the risk will be lesser, right? So yeah, the larger the areas affected, the larger number of people and properties will become vulnerable, right? So these are the vulnerable conditions. And last but not least, we talk about exposure. What kind of exposure are we talking about? We are talking about the presence of human settlement. Okay, previously we talked about the presence of human settlement. Previously we talked about the factor whereby there are benefits that people or humans are trying to reap from living near volcanoes. So the more human settlement settled near volcano areas, the higher the impact would be. Okay, that is a very simple math equation, right? So that is that. Okay, so with that in mind, with all this being discussed in topic 3, how then can we build up our community resilience? Okay, I just want everyone to note community resilience is not just about the community, it's about resilience. Okay, it is about resilience. It's about resilience, how the ability of communities living in hazard-prone zones, they are able to resist, adapt, and recover. And there are strategies to build that community resilience to help, okay, to build up this community resilience. And this is done by using the same framework, which is how we can firstly reduce exposure, okay, through land use planning. Okay, so you can see exposure is, you need to reduce exposure. We need to reduce the vulnerability, okay, the amount of vulnerable conditions, and this is done through hazard resistant building designs and monitoring and warning system. And we need to increase the preparedness. Okay, three things to note to build community resilience in terms of tectonic hazards. There are 3 things to note: decrease exposure, decrease the vulnerable conditions, and increase the preparedness. Okay, and these are done through various strategies that I will talk about later. Okay, I'm just going to write down these strategies over here so you can clearly see how they are linked up, right? Hazard resistant building, okay, and of course your monitoring system, okay, your monitoring and warning system, okay, and last but not least, increase preparedness for disaster response and recovery. Okay, so these 2 before the hazard, before disaster risk. This is actually during and after a disaster. So we need to take note of that. Alright, so first of all, let us now move into the various strategies. Okay, land use planning. Okay, land use planning is to reduce the exposure. Okay, it is to reduce the exposure. A community is to reduce a community's exposure to hazards. So these can reduce potential loss of lives, so on and so forth. What do they use? They make use of hazard maps, okay, to identify different levels of risk so that development must be controlled. There will be strict guidelines to control certain development. Is the use of data, right? So that is that. Next, we talk about how hazard resistant building can reduce vulnerability. Okay, over here. Basically, if there is an increase in earthquake resistant, resistant, earthquake resistant buildings. Okay, these will help in reducing the vulnerability, alright, as it can prevent swaying, can reduce swaying. Okay, people are less likely to be trapped in collapsed building. So that's for resistant building. And then of course there is the monitoring and warning system. Okay, we are talking about the earthquake early warning system. Okay, tsunami system is also one of them. Okay, after the Indian Ocean tsunami, there has been a installation of warning systems, okay, by at different places to make sure it helps to make predictions and warnings based on the seismic wave, okay, about potential hazards, so that can reduce the vulnerable conditions if the community is living in. Okay, last but not least, we talk about disaster response and recovery. Okay, so we are talking about, for example, before we can talk about, this can be done before as well, right? So that can be education, awareness, raising awareness. This is done through exercises. This is done through first aid training. This is done through evacuation drills, first aid training. All these need to be done in place of preparing people for the real disaster. So we talk about how some drills must be conducted, especially in schools. Okay, that's what Japan actually conducts. Okay, however, are there challenges in building community resilience? Are there challenges? Okay, these are your evaluation over here. Okay, so these are your evaluation over here. What are some challenges? First of all, okay, the extent of the community's resources. Okay, most likely affecting developing countries, right? There is a lack of resources. Okay, there is no lack of resources technologically and finance. Sure, resources may not be able to match up. Okay, are not be able to match up. Okay, in developing countries, they do not have these resources. Okay, and government, the stakeholder, may choose to prioritize economic development over disaster risk management. Alright, so you can see an example is Bangladesh, a developing country, lies along a plate boundary and 30% lives below the poverty line. It has been found that 21% of the buildings in the capital Dhaka are easily damaged. They are not reinforced at all. So the resources is a very big problem, right? And next, the capability of community to organize itself. Right, so if there is a lack of education, lack of awareness, lack of knowing how to respond to certain disaster, okay, that means they are not prepared at all. Due to what? Due to perhaps corruption, loss of funding. These mostly happen in developing countries. Okay, while this is a sweeping statement, but it is mostly more than true. Okay, right. Okay, last one. So we the last thing that we really want to look into is what is disaster risk management. Okay, so with these challenges, what can still be some effective ways to really manage some form of disaster. Okay, so disaster risk management are strategies such as respond and recover. It's divided into these two. For respond, what can be done is, firstly, there is the search and rescue efforts. Okay, these are very important. Okay, these are immediate, and usually it is during the disaster, during or after. Mostly after, right? It is aimed to find and rescue the largest amount of people. There must be search and rescues, because a lot of time survivors are trapped. Okay, so this is immediately after the search and rescue. And next, there is a evacuation. There needs to be a timely evacuation. Okay, timely evacuation involves moving people away. Why? Because for earthquake, buildings and infrastructure may collapse. There might be powerful aftershocks. What are aftershocks? Aftershocks are like ripple effects of seismic waves that's being released, and sometimes these aftershocks may be the ones that actually kill. Sometimes there will be more powerful aftershocks as compared to the main earthquake. Alright, and last but not least, it talks about basic services may be disrupted, therefore people needs to be evacuated. Okay, so like for example, for tsunami, we need to move people to higher grounds. Okay, for volcanic eruptions, we need to evacuate people from the danger zone around the volcanoes. So maybe for tsunami, okay, we are talking about higher grounds. For earthquakes, for volcano eruptions, we're talking about moving people away from danger zone. Right? Okay, next we talk about provision of basic social and social services. These are important because basic services, because like water will be disrupted, they may be polluted, so clean water is actually one of the top priority. Clean water, accommodation, right? And also food, healthcare. These are important immediate needs for provisioning of the government. Psychosocial services, it can be emotional as well. So sometimes they may need counseling. Okay, it is very difficult to see your immediate families or your families that has passed on in front of you sometimes. So it can be very traumatic or trauma. Yeah, correct. So how then can we recover from disasters. Okay, so after we respond already, we need to talk about recovery, and that is after this certain disaster. Alright, for disaster recovery strategies, it includes restoring and improving facilities. Okay, as fast as possible. Okay, people need to get back to their life, right? They need to eventually return to their original home. There needs to be some form of housing assistance. It needs to be better quality buildings. So by building very, very cheap and not resistant building for these people, it does not take away the vulnerability. So what the government need to do, or what the people need to get together and do, is to really, really make sure, okay, that whichever home that they return to, it should be constructed using hazard resistant building, because they know that area is going to be hit again, maybe in 5 years time, 10 years time, or even next year. Okay, because earthquake does not tell you what time it strikes at the end of the day. So yeah, okay, so it is challenging. Alright, it is challenging. Okay, first of all, why? Because again and again there is always a lack of resources. Okay, may not have the financial, may not have the technological. This may hamper this disaster responses. Okay, and therefore it is very challenging. Okay, next, the stakeholders. It is challenging for stakeholders to come together to integrate disaster management strategies into their practices, because the government always face difficulties, right? These difficulties are usually that the stakeholders, they may underestimate or lack awareness of the disaster risk and the need for certain management strategies, and they are high cost. Okay, like for example, local communities don't want to buy insurance, or private insurance company, they don't want to offer such insurance, right? Some individuals may be reluctant to rebuild, to retrofit their buildings to ensure that they are hazard resistant, because they just don't have the means, or perhaps they are just not convinced. Okay, so all in all, topic 3, what are the possible 9 marks question? Okay, this is a possible 9 marks question. This is a possible 9 mark question. These together is a possible 9 mark question over here. So you need to know the examples. You need to be able to know the challenges, because the challenges are your evaluation. Okay, remember that. Alright, so that's all for today, and thank you. See you again.